Welcome to Fear Street.
Before I say anything about my encounter, I just want to clarify that when I saw this thing, I went to Google and searched up what it was. I came across this website and found that another person in Jackson County had had an encounter with something like this, so I know I'm not crazy. I'd been studying wolves and their behavior for about 3 years before I had this encounter. And I know that considering Jackson County is about 656 square miles, with a population of 674,158, and it being practically infested with wildlife such as deer, livestock, and predators such as coyotes and foxes, it wouldn't be likely for a large predator such as a wolf to be lurking in the sparse woodland. The average wolf territory can vary from less than 100 miles to over 1,000, and it'd be easy for such a huge creature to live just in Jackson County alone. This may even be the very same dog, wolfman thing that the other person saw. Anyway, on to the encounter. I was just chilling on the laptop in the living room, watching people blow stuff up, when I felt like I had to go to the bathroom. I set the laptop down and put my headphones on the keyboard and got out of the chair. Let me clarify. I'm not a psychic or a medium or anything, but I have a sort of sixth sense where I can tell if something is watching me, and I knew something was. We have a huge window on the wall just above the couch, and it was a particularly cold night, so the windows caught things like breath fairly well. I turned to the window, thinking that whatever it was watching me from there, and I knew I'd see it if it was, and it'd have to either be standing on something or tall as the devil himself in order to see into the window of our trailer. It was around 6 to 8 feet off the ground, with the top of it being 11 feet. I looked over to the window, and the only thing I could see was that the floodlights were on, and something seemed to duck under the window, like a kid playing hide and seek. I didn't think anything of it, considering our neighbors were sort of druggies and alcoholics and often came to look in our windows, and every opening to the house was locked, so I had nothing to worry about. I went to the bathroom, and when I finished, I washed my hands and went back to the laptop. I noticed that the floodlights went out, so whatever it was gone. Not thinking anything else of it, I went back to watching people blow stuff up. I should mention also that my eyes are sharp enough to spot a bird about 50 feet away in a tree, so it's no surprise that when the floodlights came back on, I noticed immediately. I glanced up from the screen, expecting a drunken or high idiot to be looking in with a stupid expression on his face. But I was frozen by what I saw. It was a huge wolf that was looking at me with dirty, ambery yellow eyes. Its ears looked like they were torn or cropped or something, and the face looked sort of human-like. Not really a full human face, but more like the jawline looked very masculine and human compared to the rest of its face. Its lips were curled back, and it seemed as if it were snarling, though I couldn't hear it if it was. And its breath caught on the cold glass. It was so tall that the top of its head was halfway up the window. And if I had to guess how wide it was, I'd probably say maybe the width of my shoulders. I knew that whatever it was, it most likely had wolfish instincts, so I did the only thing I knew to do, which was avoid eye contact and make yourself look as small as you could while having your throat and underside showing. This is a very common submissive position, and although I was scared out of my mind, I knew that holding eye contact would make me seem like a challenger, and running would make me seem like prey. When I did the submissive position, it must have worked for it to leave me alone, because it just hit the window, which made the entire trailer shake, and it went away. I hadn't heard or seen anything else like it since, although I do hear the odd howl coming from the back roads. God help the poor idiot that decides to try and hunt that thing down. I can tell you now that whatever it was not friendly, because if it were, it wouldn't have slammed my window as hard as it had, and it would not have been growling like I'd taken its food. Although it practically did assault my window, I could understand why it was upset. I was on its territory, after all, an intruder and possibly a threat to its existence and its prey. It's really just best to stay out of its way and respect it. After all, it is one of God's many strange creatures in the world. Since it was summer break for my school, I was lazily lounging at home, watching TV. I got bored, so I went outside to see if I could do anything with my chickens, like feed them worms and snails. Before I go into more detail, I should explain the area I live in. My home's on the outskirts of the city. I had about 5 to 7 chickens at the time, and we hadn't expanded the coop, so it was a small pen connecting to 2 sides of the chicken coop, which is wooden and sturdy. The only ways to get into the coop are either through the trap door, which is attached to the big door, and the 3 windows. One window is on one side of the door, and the second window on the other side. The third window is a large one. Keep in mind that they all have traps connected to them so they can be closed. We have 7 acres of woodland that we call the back pasture, and if you've ever been back there, you could see that it's a popular habitat for the local deer. There was also a wild boar that was roaming around at the time, and I don't know how it got there. We'd been having trouble with poachers for a while, considering the population of deer in the woods. One poacher had set up a trail cam, one that was motion activated. There was an old rusty deer stand that had been put on a tree a long time ago, and the tree had begun to grow around it. Beyond our acres of woods, there's a large cornfield owned by our neighbors, and beyond that is a forest. I don't know what the forest is like beyond the field since we've never been there. I went outside to do something with my chickens, and I had brought along a bucket of corn for feeding the deer after. When I walked out of my home, I saw a doe that was sitting in the tall grass. I thought it was sleeping since it had its head down and wasn't moving. I, being the curious little nut I was, decided that I would sneak up on the deer and get a picture of it to show my mother when she got home from work. I crept as silently as I could across the yard that separated me from the deer. I should also mention that we have a clearing with a burn pit in it that was filled with cedar branches. I was creeping across my yard towards the deer, and when I had cleared the burn pit and was about 10 yards from it, I realized that the deer wasn't asleep. It was dead. It was the most disgusting sight I had ever seen. Its intestines were completely gone. The flesh on the body of the doe was shredded to pieces, and there was blood absolutely everywhere. It looked as if it had been sitting there for a while, and it smelled like it too. Most of the blood was dried, and the air reeked with the stench of rotting flesh, urine, and what seemed like a hint of wet dog. Something that creeped me out about the scene was, although it was a rotting carcass, there were no insects at all around it. It was as if the usual living forest was deader than the deer. Not even the neighbor's cattle made a sound. It looked as if the poor deer had simply been left after being brutally attacked and half-eaten, which it most likely was. I left the bucket at the beginning of the trail, thinking I'd come out later with my mother and grain the deer when she got home. Then I started to walk back to my house. I'd barely taken a few steps when I heard a low, snarling growl that sounded like a wolf, although it seemed distorted as if it were being played on an old radio. Against my better judgment, I turned my head around and I saw what looked like the biggest wolf I'd ever seen. It was on all fours. Its fur was black and matted in places. Its face was what you'd expect a wolf to look like, although it was broad and the muzzle seemed a little short. But the way it was curling its lips made it look as if its snout was plenty long, and its eyes were yellow. Not a bright yellow like the yellow of a flower or the sun, but a dim, amber, red yellow, if that makes sense. Its ears looked like that of a Doberman pinscher, with the cropped effect. Its front legs were long, and it looked as if it were a bodybuilder. Its paws, if you can even call them paws, looked like huge hands with long claws at the end of them. It stood up, and I heard the most sickening popping sound you could ever imagine. It sounded like the sound of popping joints, but it seemed amplified as if it were being played through a microphone, and the sound of it was coming from loudspeakers. Its body looked like a bodybuilder's, pumped up on steroids. It was so big. It had no tail that I could see, and it seemed to tower over me, although I was a good 10 meters from it. I was about 5'4" at the time, and I came nowhere close to its height. It was so tall that the tip of its ears could almost touch the top of a young cedar. It let out a loud howl, which sounded more like a roar, and it charged at me. Doing the only thing I knew to do while hyped up on fear and adrenaline, I began to run away from it. I remember clearing my yard in what seemed like hours, but was most likely only a few seconds, and running inside, slamming and locking all the doors and windows. As I calmed down a small bit, I had realized that if it had really wanted to kill me, then it would have. That what I had experienced wasn't an attack charge, but a bluff. I was lucky to get away with my life. Although this happened almost 2 years ago, it still terrifies me to think about it. The deer was gone the next day, and ever since that evening, I've been weary around the woods, only going in them in broad daylight, only when I absolutely had to, and never without a weapon. Sadly, I can't say I'm one of those people that have stopped experiencing things after the encounter, although I only had nightmares for a month after that day in June. Nothing really started to happen again until about 2 months ago, when I was staying up at night playing on the laptop. I had started to hear things moving around on the porch and turned on the light to see the shape of something huge disappearing behind the corner of my house. There was also one of the rare times I went into the woods after the first encounter, when I was helping my mother clear brush from the hunting clearing. I was going to get the mower and was walking the trail to do so when I heard bipedal footsteps following me off to my side. They stopped whenever I stopped, and I eventually ran out of the woods, and I haven't been back since. I asked my late grandmother about the creature I'd seen in the woods, and she informed me that there was something called the Wolfhead Man that stalked the Kansa tribe, preying on small children that strayed too far from their teepees. Later, I was informed by my history teacher that my house had actually been built on a tribal burial ground, and I've since been wondering if that may have had something to do with it. I hadn't heard about the Wolfhead Man before she told me about it, But when I saw that there were several eyewitness reports that proved to be truthful, it made me feel a lot better about coming out with this information. I had attempted to tell people about my encounters before, but everyone either said I was stupid, crazy, or just a plain liar. One thing's for certain, I'm not stupid, I'm not crazy, and I'm most definitely not a liar. I know what I saw, and what I saw was a dog man. I was on patrol as a deputy sheriff for the county, and I was usually assigned to the Highway 13 and Highway 30 corridors. I recall that particular July 1st, however, that a young man, 16 or 17 years old, had been sucked into a storm drain, which emptied into Cedar Lake near the Quaker Oats plant. This is a place with heavy foot traffic and located in an urban setting. The area is also bordered by Mohawk Park. As the search went on into the night, the local PD got the county involved. I parked my cruiser at what I believe was the electric company storage yard. The yard had what I estimated to be a 10-foot fence that ran parallel to a paved bike trail, on the other side of which runs a large concrete spillway to siphon off floodwaters. I arrived at what I estimate to be roughly 11:30 p.m. to 11:45. I estimate only because I assure you there never was, nor will be, an official statement or record with my name on it telling this story. As I left the lot, I was at the north end of the lake and headed west on foot. There was a lot of brush and saplings between the spillway and trail, so I proceeded on to the point the trail turns south, near where Cedar Lake empties into the Cedar River, under the railroad tracks leading to Quaker Oats. There are multiple tracks at the turn I mentioned before, and only the track furthest from myself had a train on it. With my attention on the spillway, I hardly noticed at first a faint red-colored light a distance north from my position. It was coming down the track on the other side of the train. I had thought it perhaps the tail lights of a car. Not being from that patrol route, I had no knowledge that there was, in fact, no road in that direction. There ain't much things in the world that scare me. Put simply, I've seen a lot, but nothing prepared me for that night. The lights disappeared, and that was that, or so I figured. About 5 minutes pass before I hear a snorting, almost sniffing sound coming from the other side of the tracks. When I turned, the first thing I saw were the eyes. They glowed a dull red. The thing was at least 8 feet tall, pushing 450. I judge this by the fact that I'm 6'4" and weigh 280. I turned my light, and to this day, wish I hadn't. It had pointed ears and a long muzzle, and it looked me right in the face before it bolted into the timber. It was not a mask, and it was not a person in costume. Who would walk up on an armed man with a police radio in full uniform and risk getting shot? I remember it was surreal. So final, I guess. I know what's in the dark now. People can say or think what they want, but even with a chambered round and full magazine and a Glock 40, it didn't feel like enough firepower. I unholstered and fell back toward the trail and to the electric company storage yard. Putting the fence to my back, I made a hasty retreat to the lot with my cruiser. I don't think I holstered my pistol till I got out of the park. I never spoke of it then, and I honestly don't know why I am now, but one thing's for certain, It knew I was there, and it was watching my every move. I'll never go back, and I no longer work with the department since becoming a minister. But I still carry a Glock with hollow point rounds tipped with silver if, and I rarely do, leave my home at night. A friend of mine had moved south to work with his uncle. Things didn't work out, so he called and wanted to know if I'd pick him up at the bus station in Springfield. I told him, sure. The day he came back, his bus wasn't due until 1:30 a.m. When it showed up, he was starving, so we headed up the road to Steak and Shake. While we were eating, some girls showed up after a night of partying. We stayed around and talked with them for a while. Well, by the time we left, Brian wanted to see if we could swing by one of his old girlfriend's houses before she went to work. He wanted to see if he could stay with her for a while. I didn't have anything to do the next day, so I told him that would be fine. She lived in Assumption. To get there, we headed back to Taylorville. Then, instead of heading on to Panna, where I lived, we'd cut across through the country to get to Assumption. To do this, you have to go out by Burton Eddy Lake. At that time, they had just started developing the place for housing, so it was semi-rural, with woods around the lake and the road we were on. So here we are, driving, and just about to cross a bridge, when this huge canine-type thing comes running out of the woods to our right. There were good-sized, freshly dug ditches on each side of the highway. This thing jumped from the bottom of the right ditch, cleared the highway, and landed on the back side of the left ditch. Then, it ran into the woods. It happened so fast, I didn't even have time to hit the brakes before it was already gone. I know some would say it was just a dog that surprised us, but we both agreed it was too big. Besides, I don't know of any dogs that can jump that far. I remember it had gray and light brown fur. It was very bulky and muscular. It was also on all fours. We decided that we didn't need to hang around the area and sped up. Okay, so I'm just going to start off by saying that this isn't my personal encounter. This happened to my mother and uncle when they were children. I know that the 3 encounters that were shared with me in rich detail have all been in the years that ended with a 7. That in no way is referencing the song by Steve Cook. The encounter I'm about to tell you about happened in Lakeland, Florida in 1977. My mom was 6 and my uncle was a few years younger than her. My grandparents were passing through and a friend of theirs let them spend the night in a vacant house that their friends owned. I'm guessing this was in the spring or summer because the windows were wide open, with bug screens on the windows. My grandmother was out in front of the house, taking care of my youngest uncle, who was still a baby. My grandfather was reportedly using the bathroom at the time. My mom and uncle were in the back room, playing. She said the window that was in the room was very high. Imagine the windows that would be in a basement, except this was an upper floor window. If you were outside, the window would be about 10 to 12 feet off the ground, so the window was pretty high. My mom said that as she and my uncle were playing, a huge hairy paw with long claws reached up to the window and grabbed the screen. It then dragged its claws down diagonally across the screen. Needless to say, they were scared as hell. They thought it was my grandfather, just playing a cruel prank on them. So they barged out of the room and headed straight to the front of the house. They found my grandmother and demanded to know where my grandfather was. She said that he was in the bathroom, but the two of them didn't believe her. So they marched to the bathroom, opened the door, and when they did, my grandfather was sitting there on the toilet in the middle of doing his business. The window in the bathroom was similar to that of the room that the two had been in. So in all honesty, he wouldn't have had the time to climb out of the window, climb back up, and get back on the toilet. My grandparents both thought the two of them were just freaking out about nothing at the time. Grandma said she remembered the pair being horrified though. So they went out the next morning and what do you know? There were scratches on the outside wall of the house and the window screen was torn up. I'm 17 now. My mom is 46, so this was a long time ago when this happened. Even though it's been such a long time, whenever my mom tells the story, she gets scared, talking about what she saw. So there's almost no refuting what she saw and the things she described. I was traveling Highway 10 from the west coast to the south coast of Florida. I was with my 6 kids and pulling a trailer with all of my belongings and 3 dogs in it. I was in a big SUV and it was around 2 a.m. The kids were all asleep and my 13-year-old daughter was in the passenger seat to make sure I stayed awake. So after traveling Highway 10 for 3 days, I had decided since we reached Florida, we'd cut through the state to save some time. So we get off Highway 10 on an off-road in hopes of getting gas and making up some time. It was along Route 27. We came to the first little gas station. It was closed. I was nervous because we needed gas. So we continued on. I told my daughter to keep an eye out for deer crossing the 2-lane, deserted highway, because hitting a deer could kill us all and turn us over due to the trailer we were pulling. We were traveling around 45 miles per hour. I remember this so clearly, like it was yesterday, but it was 3 years ago. We had our brights on because the road was dark and winding. A few houses were on that highway, but not many. As we came around a corner in the headlights on the road, there was a lot of blood, fresh blood. And on the side of the road was this 6 or 7 foot tall creature. It was on its hind legs, hunched over a dead deer, eating it. It didn't look up, not even when my headlights hit it. It was using its arms like a human, eating the deer. It had a very muscular body, pointed ears, and a long muzzle. If you ever saw a werewolf, this was it. It had a skinnier lower body, but used its arms and hands just like a human. If it looked up, I would have died. I looked over at my daughter. I knew we were both seeing the same thing at the same time. Tears came to my eyes instantly, and at the same time, we both said, "Werewolf!" I sped up because I was scared it would run and jump on the trailer and kill my dogs. When we got about a mile away, my heart was still beating out of my chest. We couldn't believe we had just seen a werewolf. I've never been a believer in werewolves. I don't watch any werewolf movies, and I don't have any reason to make this up. As a matter of fact, until today, I've only told a handful of people about this. I'm not sure of the exact town or road I saw it on, but I wish I did know so I could find out if we were the only ones to have seen this thing. but I guess I'll live my life wondering. It was between Alabama and Florida, along the Panhandle. I'll never forget this night, ever.